Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about a fascinating book I finished reading on vacation recently called Crossings: How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet. This is written by Ben Goldfarb, who is a scientific journalist. He's written a couple of different books, and this one came out in 2023, so pretty recently. I picked this up. Originally, I was taking one of my daughters out on her birthday date, and we went to a bookstore, and I just stopped off in the bookshelves, was kind of wandering around, and picked up a copy of this, read the first 50 pages as we were hanging out in the bookstore, and then went home and thought, I've got to read the rest of that. So I looked online and got a copy from the local library and took it with me on vacation, and really enjoyed getting the chance to read this fascinating book. So I say it's a fascinating book, but it's basically a kind of popular level guide to the discipline of road ecology, which might not sound like the most fascinating topic to lay people like myself. However, the subject really is an interesting one to engage with, very eye-opening. And Ben Goldfarb is a really phenomenal writer. As I said, he is a scientific journalist, so he has a good understanding of the scientific issues involved, but he's very good at communicating that to lay people like myself who are not road ecologists or scientists of any sort, but who are interested in learning about these things. And as he unfolds the book, what he's doing, in essence, is trying to introduce lay people to the discipline of road ecology, which is really the study of how roads and our human infrastructure impact the rest of the world, right? We tend to think about roads in a very one-dimensional way. Roads are a way to get more efficiently from point A to point B. And so we're used to thinking about roads in terms of, human infrastructure and the cost to build them or maintain them, how safe they are for human beings, how quickly we can travel over them, those kinds of things. But what road ecology is doing is sort of widening the lens and saying, okay, when you put this road into the landscape, we are building it as humans for humans, but it's not just impacting humans, it's impacting and literally reshaping everything else around it in ways that are often unexpected and surprising. And so the discipline of road ecology is really interested in asking, what impact are our roads having on the world around it? And what are some of the ways that we can use roads to accomplish good things and avoid bringing harm to ourselves and to other creatures and the created order around us in the roads that we make? So it's dealing with some of those kinds of questions. And Goldfarb is trying to walk us through what road ecology is, where it came from, the kinds of questions it asks, and to kind of give us a tour of what road ecologists have learned about the impact that our roads have on the world, and some of the things that we can do to make sure that our roads are being a net positive instead of a net negative. And he does that as a journalist, as I said. So he does a good job of, in each chapter, he's telling a story. He's often interviewing, particular scientists or activist or ecologist. He's sometimes profiling different species or animals. So he has a fascinating chapter here called Hotel California, where he's going to the LA area and looking at how the roads there have impacted the migratory patterns of different panthers, and how that's become a big kind of mobilizing thing in the media to think about how our roads impact nature and so forth. So he does a great job of writing in a way that's very engaging and entertaining. This book is about 300 pages of text, and then there's another 70 or so pages of endnotes and further reading. So it's a substantial book, but again, written at a popular level. You don't have to have any scientific background or expertise to get this. And because all of us drive on roads every single day, it's something that really is fascinating and kind of eye-opening, because you begin to sort of see what is often under the radar screen. We are surrounded by roads. We use them to get everywhere, especially in America. We're in a very car-centric society, and we've designed our society that way. But it's literally just something that's beneath us, and we're not thinking about it. We're thinking about what we're trying to get to. But having a window into road ecology helps you to see roads differently. One of the things that it kind of challenged me to think about is that, as I said, we think about roads as ways to get from point A to point B. They help or aid movement. But for the rest of the created order, for birds and insects and reptiles and mammals, roads are more like walls. They actually impede movement. And so if you think about that, you think about the 40 million miles of roads that have been built around the world. You think about the many interstates and highways and streets that crisscross our nation. We think of those as connecting points. But if you imagine each of those roads as being a wall, you begin to see how we've taken the land and chopped it up and divided it in countless ways, often without allowing for other creatures to be able to move freely. So we've created these kind of cages and bubbles which can do tremendous amounts of harm. And he talks about how scientists and activists kind of came to recognize this in the 20th century. Roads are not new. Roads have been around for a long time, but it's really the combination of the infrastructure of roads with the advent of mass mobility provided by vehicles, right? The Model T originally, and then on from there, and our very car-centric society, as we've gotten faster and faster and cars have gotten bigger and bigger, and all of these kinds of factors come together to make roads, kind of moving walls, as it were, that keep animals from migrating and disrupt the land in various ways. And so, historically speaking, you really had that massive shift taking place, and then human beings sort of stepping back from that and seeing unintended consequences, right? When people were building these roads, when they were building these cars, no one was saying, we want to disrupt the ecology around us. And yet that's an impact that happens, a kind of unintended consequence. And so conservationists, really from the early 20th century until now, the early 21st century, have been increasingly studying what are the impacts, what is the cost. And he walks through a number of those. So maybe the most obvious one is roadkill, right? You have cars hurtling along the highway at 70 miles an hour, and an animal comes in front, bam. It damages the cars oftentimes, it can kill people, and it often kills the animals. We see, the big mammals, deer and things like that, perhaps most commonly here in the U.S., but there are many others as well. A lot of frogs, a lot of snakes, a lot of birds, countless insects, right? My family just got back from, traveling halfway across the continent, and the front of our car is just covered with insect corpses, right? That's just what happens when you're traveling on the on the interstate. We don't even think about that. But all of that adds up. Not only is there a huge cost for humans, right? The kind of annual cost for deer collisions alone is something like $6 billion, right? It's tremendous, but it has a big impact on different species as well. Some of those species are not in danger of extinction, but others are. And roads, not just in the U.S., but around the world, have a big impact on the stability of different species and things like that. So roadkill is perhaps the most common and obvious ways that our roads impact other creatures and the environment around us. And he spends a lot of time in the book, kind of from different angles, looking at roadkill. But he also talks about other less expected things. So, for example, the noise pollution put out by cars, whether it's the sound of engines or just the rubber, when your tires get over 35, 40 miles per hour, it's putting out sound that will often drive animals away, keep them back from migrating or moving through, from being able to mate. It creates a kind of low-level stress. We actually note this in humans as well. If you're in a city, there's a kind of low-level stress that you feel versus being out in the country. Well, many other creatures and animals feel that same thing. We can actually track and study that. And so just the noise pollution is itself having a disruptive impact. We found that, like, for certain birds, they will change their call to try to get over the volume of the cars, but changing the call makes it less attractive to the female, so it can disrupt the mating pattern. So there's, again, all sorts of unintended consequences, but very real consequences that come from these things. Even, surprisingly to me, when roads are passing over waters, it can disrupt fish and other animals in the streams, because a lot of our culverts, when they were made purely to just kind of move water through. But they're often designed in such a way that they move water through quickly, but they don't move fish through well. They can kill fish, actually. They can kind of hurdle them through it quickly. So especially migratory fish like salmon often can't complete their migrations because of the way we've designed the culverts and underpasses of our roads. And so there's all sorts of problems that begin to emerge when you look at how roads impact the environment. However, this is not just a negative book. It's not just a sort of indictment or a screed against roads. Goldfarb and the road ecologists that he interviews and interacts with are not against roads. They're not advocating that we don't build any roads or that we blow up our infrastructure or anything like that. In fact, the whole discipline of road ecology is trying to work with politicians and construction crews and engineers and architects to say, how can we design our roads in a way that makes them work well for humans, which that's the question that we're naturally asking, but also works well for the rest of the world, for other, for mammals and for birds and for reptiles and for insects and for all of these things. And so it's trying to kind of be creative and think about how can we create underpasses that animals can migrate through, and what do those underpasses need to look like? How can we create overpasses where you have land bridges going over highways and interstates so that animals can cross through there? He looks at examples of that in Canada and Brazil and California and Europe, different places like that. How can we redesign our culverts so that it's a continuation of the stream rather than an interruption of the stream? How can we impact the way that our cars are designed to track roadkill that is the casualty of our roads, and to improve the safety of those things? So it's looking at all those kinds of questions and trying to think creatively and proactively about how we can build our roads and use our roads in a way that, again, doesn't do harm. And in all of this, it's a really interesting look at these things. And it just struck me again, something that I come back to more and more as I read more and more, and that is that I'm someone who is kind of socially a conservative for sure, politically a conservative in the classical sense of that, in the Edmund Burke kind of way, not the Tucker Carlson kind of way. And when you look at classical conservatism, you can see how the questions, the concerns of something like road ecology and a lot of environmental concern actually fits very naturally within a conservative framework. It's concerned to deal with the world as it is, not the world as we wish it was. It's trying to look at things not ideologically, but practically. And it's trying to bring to that a kind of humility to say, whatever great big idea we have we're excited about, like cars and roads and things like that, there's going to be unintended consequences. So there's value in moving slowly. There's value in being careful. There's value in thinking about not just the benefits of something, but the potential cost of something, and of trying to really steward those things well so that we're not creating problems down the road. One of the things I was struck with as you look at the discipline of road ecology is that if we had been asking these questions back when cars were first being put on the road, we could have built our roads proactively in ways that would have been much less disruptive, both for people and for the environment. But we weren't asking those questions. We were forging ahead very progressively and optimistically. And now we're in a situation where a lot of our infrastructure really needs to be rethought, reevaluated, and redone. And so there's a huge kind of bill we have created for ourselves that now needs to be paid. Now, one of the things that is a potential excitement, and what I like about this book, again, it's not just a negative book, it is optimistic, and it's looking forward to how we can improve these things in the future, is that in America, for example, a lot of our infrastructure is getting to an age where it needs to be redone anyways. So now is a really good time for us to approach that infrastructure to think about how can we make it work for humans, how can we make it financially feasible, but also how can we incorporate some of the insights and concerns of disciplines like road ecology, which are trying to help us think more broadly than just our short-term immediate concerns. We're thinking in a more conservative way of how do we conserve and preserve and promote life for ourselves, but also for future generations that come beyond. And how can we live as stewards, right? This is one of the biblical categories, that we're stewards of the creation. For someone who does not believe that God is the creator and that man has been made as a steward of creation, you have to kind of make the case for why it's worth caring about the destruction of a certain species or the disruption of a certain ecosystem. But for a Christian, you shouldn't have to make that case. Often there is a case. Often the health of those creatures impacts our health as well, or our financial good, or different things like that. So that we are intertwined. You can make those kind of practical arguments, but you shouldn't have to, because we believe that God has made those creatures and therefore they have value, and that God has made us and has given us a responsibility to care for those creatures. So it's quite sad to me that oftentimes in the church and in conservative circles, so-called, there isn't a conservative impulse on this front. We've kind of ceded this territory to who are often called liberals, right? Even though I think conservative Christians have the most solid ground on which to engage in environmental and ecological concern. Now, there's all sorts of nuances and qualifiers we can give to that. That doesn't mean that we villainize humanity or ignore the concerns of humanity for the sake of other creatures alone. But if our conversation about things like our infrastructure, like our building, like our development, doesn't include ecological concerns, something is deeply wrong. And that's something that you'll walk away with from this book, although Goldfarb is not writing as a Christian for sure. But his concerns resonated with me as a conservative Christian, because I could see the overlap and connection between what he's writing about and what I believe. So I hope that more conservative Christians will engage with these things, and I'm grateful for those who have done that and who are doing that, and would read books like this to think about how we can engage these things well. Because one of the benefits of this book is it does help you as a voter, as a person, to see the value of those environmental concerns. You know, whenever we have the opportunity to engage in a building project, whether it's, you know, maybe your local town or county redoing a road, and then you see it's going to take a year longer because they've got to do these environmental studies, or like right now my church is trying to buy a piece of land we hope to build one day, and you know, you got to pay for these environmental studies, you got to deal with the consequences, you got to take the time, and it can feel like just a waste or a cost. But reading books like this helps you to see it is due diligence. It's something worth doing because, again, we are stewards. We have a responsibility. And God has made a wonderful world that we are to enjoy and delight in, not to destroy or denigrate. And oftentimes that happens unintentionally. But whether it happens intentionally or unintentionally, it happens. And there's a real cost to that. And so this book is a wonderful window into those kinds of questions and conversations from the vantage points of our roads. And he points forward very productively, I think, to some things that we can do, some ways that we can address the problems that roads pose, and design them in a way that makes sense not only for human beings, but for all of God's creatures, if I can put it in Christian language. So, if any of that sounds interesting to you, if you're interested in ecology, if you're interested in infrastructure, if you're interested in nature, if you just want a different window into the world as you drive down the road and the impact that that's having, this is a great book that will challenge you, but hopefully also encourage you and give you some practical things that you can encourage and pursue as we seek to be good stewards of the world that God has given us. So this is a book worth reading, I think. Crossings, How Road Ecology is Shaping the Future of Our Planet by Ben Goldfarb.